8 and 9. And it says here, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, if the gift it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. And then now we're going to go to Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13. I think we can all say this. I can do all things through Christ who can strengthen me. Amen. Our speaker is Dr. Oliver Joe. Joe Oliver. Joe Oliver. Dr. Joe Oliver.
I don't know if that one light's converted. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Get my I had a hard time figuring out what I was going to call this presentation. And I realized that the best thing would be our troubles are basically of our own making. And as I go through the story, you'll see how that's true. An illustration of how we can get our things self-centered is a little story I heard one time. This man was going across the desert on a camel. Off in the distance, he could see a really big windstorm coming up. So he figured he better be camping, hunkered out, because it looked really bad. So he got his tent all set up, everything fastened, and sure enough, here came the wind and the sand, blowing like everything. In a little bit, he hears his camel going, can I just put my nose inside of the tent? The wind is blowing so hard, sand is getting on my nose, and I can't breathe. Well, the fellow thought, what's the harm? It won't hurt nothing. So he let him put his nose in. Well, in a little bit of the camel says, I got my eyes shut tight as they could be, but the sand is still getting in. I'm trying to kind of put just enough of my head in the tent to keep my eyes out. He thought, well, there's no harm in that, so he let him do that. Well, in a little bit, the camel says, I got my ears all the way down, tight as I can against my head, but this below is hard, sand's getting in my ears. Can I just put that much in? Well, he thought, what's the harm in that? As you can see, progressively, the camel has taken over the tent, and the man continues to not see that there's any harm in it. All of a sudden, he realizes he's standing outside of the tent in the middle of the worst sandstorm he's ever been in his life, and the camel is heading out of the weather nice and dry. All of a sudden, what started out as there's no harm, this became a great deal of harm. Now, there's a man that he had a different kind of camel come into his tent. And there was a newspaper article written about him that I would like to share. Each morning, this soul wakes up and asks God for another day of sobriety. At night, when he goes to bed, he thanks him for another day of sobriety. After getting up each morning, he goes to work. He walks with a slight hitch in his gait, his speech and manner are deliberate and thoughtful, eyes are round and clear, smile gentle, and bedside manner is kind. This fellow turned out to be a doctor. He began the solo practice in October of '95. His grandfather also practiced medicine in the same town before his death for years. And his father was an OB-GYN in California, brother OB-GYN in Alaska. This doctor spent his summers with his grandparents and worked over at the family farm and often ran a house calls with his doctor. So he was always around and exposed to medicine, so it was a natural thing to go into medicine for him, and he chose family medicine because there's a nice variety of things he get to see and to get to know people better with that kind of a specialty. He seemed to be doing well and good until August in 2006, when he taken a shower. He got horribly dizzy, and at first he thought he was just having inner trouble. That dizziness went away. He a few days later went to the office when he started to get gas, wound up having a fairly major stroke. He couldn't believe that was happening to him, and he wound up going to the hospital, spent time there for almost 2 weeks, got out, went back to work, did not think that, did not want to admit to himself that alcohol had been the cause of the problem. He realized he drank a little bit too much, which was pretty much every evening after he got off work, but he never did drink it all at work. He had been given Coumadin in the hospital, and on the label it said it was okay to have a small amount of alcohol if you didn't drink too much. So he figured he knew what to do and he could handle all this because he was, all of his education, he would be the master of the alcohol, which he wasn't. Denial and pride kept him from realizing that alcohol had done this to him. He started back drinking after getting out of the hospital a few weeks afterwards, and gradually the amount of drinking picked up. Little by little, and it was not long before he was back to the amount he'd been drinking before he had the stroke, which was about a pint a day. The cause of the stroke was he had developed a dilated alcoholic cardiomyopathy, which is a enlarged heart that caused him to go into atrial fibrillation, which is the irregular heartbeat that predisposes somebody to form a clot in their heart, which if that clot breaks loose, one can end up causing a blockage and stroke, which is what happened to him. But with all his education, the pride and denial kept him from admitting to himself that that was the cause. He started back to drinking, and he had been walking and exercising after having the stroke. But it's the drinking increased, the walking decreased, and so his health started to deteriorate. He wasn't taking good care of himself, and he definitely wasn't at 100% of his capabilities. Then one day somebody had been to see him, and a complaint was made to the medical board because the person thought he might have been impaired at work. And the investigator showed up and saw the shape he was in and told him that if he voluntarily surrendered his medical license and went through treatment and got involved with the physician health program, there was a possibility of at least getting his license back if he did that. But if he did not, and let the board make their decision based on his findings, they would most assuredly take his license away, and chances of getting it back would be much slimmer. So the hardest thing that he ever did in his life was he signed that paper surrendering his privilege to be able to practice medicine. About a week and a half later, he wound up in rehab in Atlanta, scared to death, wondering how in the world did he wind up here? After all, he knew what he was doing. He was like the master of the camel. That first drink that he'd taken years ago at the time seemed harmless enough at the time, but over time, gradually the camel called into his tent, and now he was in a very, very bad situation. Holly was in counseling or in rehab in Monroe. His counselor really helped him get ready for when he left. Got lined up for his medical doctor appointments, got him an appointment with the North Carolina Physician Health Program, which is an organization that's set up to help doctors to get in the kind of trouble he had, as far as getting into a plan of recovery and maintaining that. They would monitor and be able to provide objective evidence to the board that he was doing what he was supposed to do when he submitted an application to have his license reinstated. Part of that involved having to call an 800 number every day to find out whether you had to go do a urine drug screen. Every morning, the phone would say you had not been selected for testing today. So one day a month, randomly, you'd be selected and have to go to the lab to submit your answers. Also, they had a field worker that came out to visit him every week or every month. Randomly, he would call me, I'm going to be there tomorrow. You are going to be available, aren't you? And of course, the answer was always yes, I'll be here. After about 3 or 4 months of visits from the field agent from the physician help program, the doctor asked the guy, how long do I have to call that 800 number? He said, 5 years. Well, the doctor felt like he'd just been kicked in the stomach. He thought, 5 years, I'll never be able to do this for 5 years. Well, after he thought of it a little while, he realized that he had gotten himself into this mess. Nobody had twisted his arm, nobody held a gun to his head and made him take that first string. No matter how bad of a decision it was, he had made it of his own free will. Keith Snow was pretty shook up. But then one of the things that he had heard in rehab, that he had gotten so sick of hearing he couldn't stand it one day at a time. That became so annoying that he was, but the thought of that came to him, and he realized he did not have to call that number for 5 years. All he had to do was call it today. And if God gave him another day tomorrow, he'd worry about that then. But he realized that if he turned his will and his life over to God's care on a daily basis, by doing that he could put up with pretty much anything for one day. And when he realized that, the anxiety, the knot in his stomach is all went away, and he realized it's going to be okay. Well, the field agent had misunderstood him, because about 1.5 years later, he had got a call from the head man of Raleigh that said, you don't need to call the number anymore. Well, it turned out that that part of their monitoring only lasted for 18 months. The contract with PHP lasted for 5 years, where they would continue to monitor, but not the vigorousness of the everyday phone call. So when he heard the news that he didn't have to call anymore, he did something that he would, if 1.5 years ago you would have told him he'd do this, he would have said there was no way. He actually volunteered to keep calling the number until he got his interview with the board. The doctor, the people at PHP had never had anybody do that before. But he said, yeah, I guess it'll be okay. So he called the number for several more months. Finally, they told him that just to go ahead and quit. He finally got his application in the board, and every time that he would get to certain points, they would kind of change rules. He had the application in, he had formed a reentry plan. what she had to do, and got a letter thinking it was going to be a invitation for an interview with the board, and there was a letter that indicated he was going to have to go to a extensive assessment in Colorado. The price tag on that was $8,000, which he did not have. He had been involved with vocational rehab, and they said they thought they could help. The letter from the board indicated he had 10 business days to either verify that he was going to go to Colorado, or he could withdraw his application and reapply later on, which it would entail a whole ton of work. So vocational rehab told him they thought they could help. He got a phone call in a couple of days. They said, come sign the paper. We don't understand why, but we called Raleigh to see about getting the money. Normally, it takes them a month to be able to approve that kind of money. He said, well, when we told them what we were wanting to do, they said, okay. And so the money was available. He just had to go up and sign a paper, and a check was sent. Instead of it taking a month, that was a Thursday or Friday. The following Tuesday, Wednesday, the money to pay for this in Colorado came through. And that was just one of the incidents where God was doing for him what he could not do for himself. Finally, after 4.5 years, he had got a temporary license to start practicing medicine again. He thought it was going to be all smooth sailing at first, but it took 6 months from the time of getting the temporary license before he was able to move back into our office to get started. Now, you probably know already or may have guessed who this fellow is. I am that man, and I suffer from a chronic progressive daily disease of alcoholism. However, my disease has been in remission since October 23rd of 2007, provided I continue to do what I do on a daily basis, and that's to ask God for another day of sobriety each day, turn my will and life over to care, and whatever happens during the day, everything I know will be okay. There is a little passage I would like to read to you that is taken out of a textbook for alcoholics. And I think that a lot of what's in this little segment I want to read is applicable to all mankind, not just alcoholics. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of all of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-illusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we inevitably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which later place us in a position to be hurt. Our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. Though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything else, the alcoholic must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or he kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had a moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we cannot live up to them even though we would like to. Neither could we reduce neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing we're trying our own power. We had to have God's help. This is how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our direction. He is a principal, and we are his agents. He is Father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was a keystone to the new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer being all-powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, in our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing that we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flowing in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. I don't know if I got enough time for this one little story about how God takes care of us even when we don't realize he is. During the time between I get the temporary license and starting to open work, my brother had a soft shell turtle that he bought in Pasadena at a pet store. This thing was about that big when he bought it. Well, 10, 11, 12 years later, this thing was this big. It had gotten to where it was having some kind of health problems, and he found out that Emory Vet School in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, was, I think, the best place in the country as far as knowledgeable about turtles and reptiles and that kind of thing. So he asked me if I could go down there for Atlanta, pick the turtle up he was going to have shipped and take it up to the vet school in Emory. And so I was still not working, so I said, sure. Well, we were all set to go. I was ready to go the next morning. At about 9:30 that night, he called me and said, I gotta get a different box. He said, the one I got is big enough. The hurl is gonna be sideways. It ain't gonna hurt their hurl, but some people may get a little upset because they gotta get a new box. So we delayed by 1 or 2 days. It's been a while for, but it was very good. You didn't go that morning. So I called you back, had the new container, got everything shipped. I was on the way to Atlanta. I started hearing a little bit of whine in my old pickup truck, and I thought it was just, I was hearing things because the old truck had so many miles. It was over 300,000 miles on the damn truck, but they took good care of it. And I kept thinking I heard something. All of a sudden, running in the interstate about 70, 75 miles an hour, motor's running, but it just quits playing. I pulled over to the side of the road. I'd been so intent on watching where I was going, I did not realize exactly where I was. But there was a mile marker sign. I'd just gone past the Big Peach in Gaffney, but I had been so focused, I didn't realize that that's where I was. Here I am on the way to Atlanta to pick up the turtle, and the car just quit pulling. The motor ran, I put it in forward drive, gave the gas, motor revved up, but it would not move. I was stuck. I said a little prayer. I said, Lord, please help me. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm supposed to be down there, and I'm stuck. Well, since it's a good of my little prayer, I remembered my cousin was a truck driver, and he might know where I was. So maybe if he knew where I was, he could direct me to where I might get some help. So I called him up, and he said, well, I'm heading down from Atlanta on 26, 85 years. I'm going to be where you are in about 20, 25 minutes. And well, he had a low boy that he bought. He said, let me call the officer and sure they don't have a problem with me hauling you there on their trailer. Because he had already dumped off his stuff. He said, and see if you can get hold of the rollback. Ricker, he said, because they can unload that under my trailer. So I called it to Rockwell. The lady that was going to help me in the office, I asked her if she could find the number of a tow service that was in the area where I was, and gave her the mile marker on 85 where I was, and in a little bit she called back and gave me the number, and I called them. While I was sitting there waiting for my cousin to show up, I remembered seeing the ad on TV about Amazon will pick you up. Or not Amazon, but Enterprise. Enterprise rental car will pick you up. So my cousin knew that right now from where I was, said there was a big vacant parking lot where a bowling alley was. So the very next exit from where I was there. He said, have the guy hook up So I'm waiting on him. Robert shows up. Before I can get out of my truck, the rollback guy pulls up. My cousin talks to the rollback guy saying to lift him up and bring him down to this first exit. So I stayed in my truck and it was loaded up on the rollback. We pulled down about a quarter of a mile to the exit and got off. I sat in the truck while they were loading it off onto the trailer. In the meantime, I called Enterprise. Before they got my truck chained down to the trailer, here came Enterprise into the parking lot. I jumped out of the truck, got in the car with him, went, signed the paper. I was on my way back to Atlanta. My truck was on the way home to Rockwell. And that whole thing didn't take much more than an hour from the time I broke down till I was back on the road going down to hook up the turtle. I couldn't organize that to work any better if I'd planned it out for a month. If we had gone the day we were going to, Robert would have been nowhere around. If we'd have gone the day later, he would have been nowhere around. If we had not gone the day we did and at the time that I'd left home, he would have been anywhere around him and give me any help. All of this happened, it wasn't for to save the turtle, it was to let me know that God was looking out for me, even when I didn't know that I needed looking out after. Because there's no way I could have organized that and orchestrated it and it to come off any smoother or any less time than it did if I didn't be planning it for months. So that's why I chose the closing song, God Will Take Care of You, because throughout this whole journey of everything that happened with the alcohol and all the things that happened, when I needed to happen, didn't know where, how things were going to work out. They did. Thank you, and